Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. Up first on the hazardous weather graphic, we've got continuation of the wind advisories from yesterday for the upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country in and around the Fairbanks area, and the eastern Alaska range, as well as the upper Yukon Valley. For winds tonight, these advisories are out tonight and will end at 4 or 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. So the winds will continue in the 20 to 30 mile an hour range, gusts to possibly as high as 40 miles an hour. And again, that's for tonight and then diminish tomorrow morning. And down here we have flood advisories out for the Copper River Basin as well as the Susitna Valley. Flood watches are out for the Copper River Basin and the Susitna Valley, and that kicks into effect Monday morning and will continue out until Wednesday morning, and that's for the rivers Yentna, Squentna, and McLaren there up around the Denali Highway area, as well as Montana, Willow, and the Little Susitna rivers. With the and what's going on, several bands of heavy rain will be moving across the area through Tuesday night, and lower elevations could pick up 1 to 2 inches of precipitation, while higher elevations may see anywhere from 2 to 5 inches of precipitation, such as the Alaska Range here, Western Alaska Range, upslope areas there, western slopes, as well as the Talkeetna Mountains could see 3 inches of rain as well later tonight and into early tomorrow. So moving on to fire danger. Just one spot there southeast of Fairbanks on the north side of the Alaska Range. It barely reached the high fire danger zone. Really not a big area at all, and that's about it as far as fire danger goes around the state, especially with all the rain that fell today over a large portion of the interior. On to satellite imagery. Here's the moisture fetch. Got one surge into Canada, another one coming across the interior earlier today, edging eastward, another weaker one coming onto the coast here, a break, and then some more clouds gathering with the next system. Actually, that's a continuation of the frontal boundary on down across central Aleutians with the next development southwest of the western Aleutian areas. Otherwise, looked dry today for the eastern Aleutians. Alaska Peninsula, comparatively, especially to the interior, dried out up over the northwest interior areas and the Seward Peninsula. And not much in the way of precipitation along the north slope of the Arctic coast. Most of the precipitation south of the Brooks Range, and again pushing eastward. A nice day over the Panhandle, just one band of non-precipitation producing clouds there dragging across the central areas. And rolling this through again, got high pressure down to the south of the Alaska Peninsula and good southwest flow, both the surface and aloft coming around that, bringing pretty windy conditions to the southwest coast, Kuskokwim Delta today, again, as well as over the interior areas, as I mentioned. And winds gusting as high as 40 miles an hour at Cape Newenham, while other areas saw 30 to 35 mile per hour winds. That occurred at Bethel this afternoon, as well as up at Galena, for example, there. And pretty good precipitation amounts. Heaviest amount, 12-hour rainfall amount ending at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Occurred at Ruth Glacier. That picked up 0.8 of an inch of rain. Farther to the west here, or out west, Flat had about ½ an inch of rain, and Tanana, 2/3 of an inch of rain, as well as a place called Cottonwood, which is west-southwest of Tanana. They also had about 2/3 of an inch of rain, which is about over 0.6 of an inch, all falling today. And Rainfall lighter here off to the east a little bit there, but not that much, more in the 1 to 3/10 inch range, but it's a pretty widespread area of moderate amounts of precipitation from the eastern Brooks Range here all the way down the southwest interior. And the next system right out here, the frontal boundary there, moves inland tonight. Warm front spreads again, another shot of pretty good rain into the Alaska Range and the Kuskokwim Valley. Widespread area of rain and fog here from the Seward Peninsula on down along the southwest coast, actually well inland across Yukon Kuskokwim deltas. Some of that into the Kuskokwim Valley, turning more showery down toward Iliamna and King Salmon. West-northwest flow behind the warm front may see some clearing there for Kodiak Island. Advance of the warm front, periods of rain. Again, on the heavy side for the Talkeetna Mountains tonight. Rain from the North Gulf Coast into the eastern interior areas. Dry back here to the north and northwest. A few scattered showers to the Brooks Range. Some fog, rain, and drizzle with a weak trough grazing the central Arctic coast. Rain extends along that frontal boundary. Something of a wave developing right here. So rain and fog into the central Aleutians, drier to the west. And not too bad here for the southeast coast tonight. Light winds and variably cloudy skies. Some moisture might sneak into the northern areas, but whatever it does will be quite light. Then for tomorrow, system moves eastward. Again, surges of moisture flowing eastward here in pretty good flow aloft with periods of moderate to possibly heavy rain, as I mentioned, keeping those resulting in the flood watches again for the Susitna Valley and Copper River Basin. Even up here to the northwest, could be a fair amount of rain once again tomorrow with this band of moisture back through here, tapering off to showers out toward the Yukon Delta. And the next system spreading clouds and more rain. Really not much of a break in the clouds at all between these systems as they come in. If you see any sun at all, think of it as a real bonus. But this next low, isn't really much of a wind producer, but should be another pretty good rain producer with good southwest flow coming up out of the western Pacific there. So it looks like rain will increase again along the southwest coast tomorrow afternoon. Rain in the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians back to about Adak, and higher pressure dries it out for the western Aleutians. Back here to the northwest, not too bad. Actually dry behind this system as it rolls through. Could see some sunshine out in these areas from the north slope to possibly the Seward Peninsula. Drizzle, fog still plagues the Arctic coast at times in areas there. And the Panhandle with high pressure right off the coast will make for another nice day over the central and southern areas. Could be some clouds, low clouds, fog along the coast, and a chance of some moisture up over the extreme north, mostly north of Juneau to Haines, Skagway, back to Elfin Cove, and definitely wet for Yakutat. And then the forecast for Tuesday, that low actually tracks northeastward here up to near or just south of Eagle in that vicinity there, and could be a pretty good band of possibly gale force winds, a narrow band of gale force winds in advance of this front as it pushes eastward along the north coast of the Panhandle, maybe the eastern North Gulf Coast as well, with a shot of pretty good rainfall in for Yakutat. And looks wet over the Copper River Basin, and wet conditions, periods of rain again over much of the upper central Tanana Valley, actually a fair distance to the west, and then down along the Kuskokwim River Valley areas into the out to the coast. And it gets a little more showery and more intermittent and much lighter here, but still pretty good IFR out in this area. Could see a few breaks maybe over the Yukon Delta in the afternoon behind this trough, and also some breaks possible for the northern Koyukuk Valley, possibly out toward the Kobuk Valley, but lots of clouds, rain, and fog for the Chukchi Sea up to the northwest coast, across the North Slope and the Arctic coast. Looks definitely cloudy with a chance of rain. Out to the west, high pressure, no storms at all for the Bering Sea there, with some clearing possibly showing up over the Aleutians with any luck at all, but winds will be quite light. Northwesterlies here will be in the 15 to maybe 25 mile per hour range. Probably see some higher gusts, maybe 30, 35, maybe even 40 through the Aleutian range in the passes, and becoming breezy at Kodiak there once that trough swings through out of the northwest. And for the lows tonight, lower to mid 30s again for the Arctic coast, mid 30s for the North Slope, 40s for the Brooks Range, and 50s over the interior areas to mid 50s there for the Alaska Peninsula areas and Bristol Bay. 50s for the Panhandle. Highs tomorrow, 65 to 70, possibly for the Susitna Valley. Lower to mid-60s for Bristol Bay. Same thing up over the Yukon Flats. 40s for the North Slope. Eastern Central Arctic Coast, mid to upper 30s for the highs. And the Panhandle, 65 to 72. Central and southern areas cooler with more clouds, chance of rain in the north, and mid-50s for the Aleutians. Lows the following morning, not much different. 30s along the Arctic coast, 50s down to the south, and the highs shaping up like this, mid-60s. Northeast interior Tanana Valley, Susitna Valley, and the southern southeast coast may reach 70 again.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Rolling into flying weather graphics here. Weather depiction, IFR, big chunk of it out here in the Bering Sea, becoming marginal farther out to the west. Aleutians IFR mostly look like some holes poked in it there on the lee side of the terrain. VFR here for the southwest coast into the interior, marginal VFR, Copper River Basin, Talkeetna Mountains, Kenai Peninsula becomes IFR, Gulf of Alaska right up to the coast. VFR for the Panhandle. IFR in the afternoon over the northern Panhandle, staying VFR down to the south. IFR much of the Gulf of Alaska up to the eastern North Gulf Coast. And eastward too, again, about the Talkeetna Mountains becoming VFR, Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, but marginal for the Kenai Peninsula. IFR, most of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. If not IFR, then it'll be marginal. Marginal VFR covering a good portion of the central interior. We've got a strip of VFR there just south of the Brooks Range, upper Yukon, Kobuk, Koyukuk Valleys, south coast, the Seward Peninsula, IFR up along the Arctic coast. And for Tuesday morning, IFR more extensive and inland up there along the Arctic coast with some areas of IFR along the Brooks Range, otherwise marginal for the North Slope, staying VFR upper Yukon, Koyukuk, Kobuk, and Noatak Valleys. And a lot of marginal and IFR now up over the Tanana Valley to the 40-mile country, a little bit of VFR mixed in. IFR, Gulf of Alaska to the southeast coast here. And then staying VFR over some of the inland areas. IFR Bristol Bay right up along the western Alaska Range, central Alaska Range, and actually IFR on the east side. It looks like a little bit less IFR over the Bering Sea, but a lot of marginal if it's not IFR. And for the afternoon, marginal VFR Brooks Range to the Arctic coast through the Bering Strait, improvement out here to the west with the IFR retreating and kind of dissolving back to the west and southwest there. Looks like mostly north of the western Aleutians, marginal VFR, spotty IFR along the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, south side of the peninsula VFR, and right up into Kodiak Island, Cook Inlet, marginal VFR, Kuskokwim Valley from the southwest coast, Seward Peninsula, North Slope on out to the Arctic coast. IFR hanging along the North Gulf Coast here, especially over the Coast Range, northern Prince William Sound, into the northern Panhandle again, marginal for the Kenai Peninsula, marginal up here, 40-mile country in areas, mostly the White Mountains there, upper Tanana Valley we'll call it, VFR for the upper Yukon to the Koyukuk, VFR Southern Panhandle, IFR right along the coastline there. And for passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR tomorrow, same forecast for Adigan. Both passes occasionally marginal, which means there'll be VFR at other times. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR at times, as well as Rainy will be marginal though, so a little better for that pass. And for Windy, marginal VFR, Isabel IFR, Mintesta IFR, Tanita IFR becoming marginal, Portage marginal, Chilkoot and White IFR. Freezing levels 2,000 feet on the western Arctic coast, 14,000 feet here over the Alaska Peninsula into the southern Gulf of Alaska. So a good thermal gradient here across the Bering right through the interior. That supports some good southwest flow, west southwesterly flow, funneling all the moisture in. Icing wise, above 8,000 feet, areas of kind of a solid area of eastward progressing surges of moisture through the central interior. And less of that there, not so much moisture streaming eastward there up from the Brooks Range to the Arctic coast, but that icing will be about 5,000 feet. And for the jet stream, again, good southwest flow here, 140, 130 knots, dropping back to about 90 over the Bristol Bay area, then back up to 120, blowing along the North Gulf Coast there in the northern Panhandle. Big trough back to the north, upper level low here down to the south, really not any influence on Alaska weather. 9,000 feet, southwest flow, 30 to 45 knots in the interior, lighter up to the north, and 50 knots, eastern Aleutians back to 20 to the west. Same flow at 3,000 feet, but lighter winds. You can see up here just 10 to 20 over the northern interior, mostly 10. And mostly 10 knots, 10 to 15, picking up to 20, 25 along the southern part of the state here of the interior, and up to 40 here over the southeast Bering, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, 35 for the Barren Islands. Turbulence, moderate chop here, Copper River Basin, Alaska Range, southwest of Kodiak, Bristol Bay, and much of the Aleutians. And after the break, I'll be back with the marine forecasts.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens of GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And Eric, thanks so much for joining us again tonight.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Thanks, Eric. And we've been talking about the complex gathering of information from satellites, looking down on the surface of the planet, and some of those orbits around the planet work for Alaska, and some of them don't. There's a lot of challenges with those. How can we get better imagery for the poles and specifically for Alaska?
Right. Well, today we're going to talk about a very interesting kind of satellite orbit that has potential to be real helpful for the high latitudes. Okay. Especially us here in Alaska. Canadians, Russians, Norwegians will all be interested in this. The satellites are not in orbit yet. Now the future is uncertain, but it's possible, and if this happens, it will be wonderful for Alaska. Okay. It's called the highly elliptical orbit. Oh, it's interesting. Yeah. And I think first, to help our discussion, we should get back to some of Kepler's laws and how do satellites work. Sure. Kepler's first law, an orbit of a planet around a sun or a weather satellite around the Earth is not necessarily a circle, it's an ellipse. Okay. And the highly elliptical orbit takes advantage of this aspect. We're going to put the Earth in one of the ellipse and then stretch one of the foci of the ellipse and then stretch that ellipse out real far to make it highly elliptical. And the foci is that bend part of the end of the ellipse. If you're going to stretch out a rubber band, that would be the center, kind of the stretchy part. Yes. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then Kepler's second law says that the closer something is to the thing that it's orbiting, the faster it goes. Okay. We see this in the solar system, that Mercury flies around the sun real fast. Jupiter, much slower. Jupiter's further away, it's slower. Mercury's closer in, it's faster. This happens with weather satellites too. Even satellites like the International Space Station, it's pretty close to the Earth. It goes around the Earth in only 90 minutes. That thing is moving. It's only 250 miles away. So how can we take advantage of these two aspects of Kepler's laws of motion to get better weather surveillance of Alaska? And this highly elliptical orbit is going to be the approach. So we have with us today our friendly planet Earth and our simulated satellite, the lid off of this salt shaker here. Sputnik there. Yeah. There it is. It's shiny, it's metal, it's space worthy. And what we want to be able to do is, could you have a satellite hover over the top of the world, up over Alaska? You can't really do that. Geostationary satellites have to be over the equator. Okay. So how could we almost solve this? And this is the tricky part. Maybe should we tilt the Earth over? Focus on the pole. That's what we're trying to accomplish here, right? So here we have the northern side of the planet, and we're going to trace out the orbit of a satellite with this salt shaker lid here. Now imagine a highly elliptical orbit. So let's put the Earth in one of the foci of the ellipse, and we'll have an imaginary foci out here. So the satellite will not go in a circle around the Earth, but will be in this long strung out ellipse. So the satellite will go... Kind of like a racetrack. Yes, there you go, like a racetrack. So it's an oval elliptical shape like that. And notice now that when the satellite's over here, we've got a nice view of the northern hemisphere around. There's Alaska, Russia, Canada, Greenland, all there. So that's the ellipse aspect of an orbit, Kepler's first law. The second law saying that when you're further away as a satellite, you go slower. And this we can take real advantage of. Because the way this orbit works, when the satellite goes over Antarctica here, it's going to be close to the Earth. It's going to be moving, whoosh, goes on by. And then as it comes out here, it will slow down. This increases what is known as the dwell time. the satellite will just hang here looking for hours at Alaska and the high Arctic. And then eventually it will come around and it will accelerate and whiz around the South Pole and then come back and hang here for a while because it's further away from the planet. It goes slower. It has to. That's the laws of motion. And such like that, repeating.
Wow.
Now the real important way to make this work is you have to have two satellites. So that while one is whipping around the pole, you've got the other one out here, and they work as a team. You could then get a series of images of Alaska that can be almost from a constant frame of reference, and you can loop them together to make movies. You can take a picture every 10 minutes, say, of Alaska, and then loop it, playing it at several frames a second. You could see the clouds whiz on by. You know, the Weather Channel, weather broadcasters in the lower 48 especially can show these movie loops from the geostationary satellites. In Alaska, we've never really been able to do that very well, especially in the higher, most northern parts of the state, because those geostationary satellites are over the equator. It's not a good view. And this highly elliptical orbit, whipping around the South Pole and then dwelling up here, would be a way for us to get that constant frame of reference and do really good weather surveillance over the Arctic, seeing where those storms are, where they're going. Nothing quite like a movie loop of the weather in time to really illustrate what's important, what's going on.
And compared to what we have right now, we just have small windows or snapshots of what's going on with the polar orbiters. We don't have that long-range view that's looking top-down to give us that complete motion picture that helps us understand so much of the atmosphere at this
There's
point.
so many different kinds of satellites. Each has their advantage. Each is important, and the highly elliptical orbit satellite will also fit into that scheme. It's a nifty idea to solve an Alaskan challenge.
That's fantastic. Well, that sounds really exciting. And again, kind of a satellite dream of the future to come. Okay, very good. Thanks for joining us today, Eric. We really appreciate the information. And if you'd like to learn more about what Eric does at Dehne, at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, we invite you to visit the web address that you see on your screen there. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at today's sea ice analysis. Again, not a lot different from what we saw yesterday. Heavier multi-year ice up here to the north of the coast, extending down to the coast on the eastern side there. Areas thinning out, opening up north of that ice field. And not a lot of change expected. No real big departure from what we've been seeing the last several days for the next 4 or 5. And for the coastal water forecast, north to northwest 15, south coast of the Panhandle, light southerlies, Clarence Strait, southwest 15, Stevens Passage, south 30 knots, small craft advisories for northern Lynn Canal, otherwise southwest 10 to 15 on the north coast. And for Tuesday, southerlies, gale force southerlies now in Lynn Canal with storm force gusts in the forecast, 7-foot seas. South 15 Stevens Passage, light southeast winds Clarence Strait, south 15 on the south coast there with 5-foot seas. Increasing as you go north, we've got small craft advisories on the north coast, 25 to 30 out of the south, 7 to 9-foot seas. Prince William Sound, light easterlies, 10 knot seas, 2 feet. And the North Gulf Coast here, southwest 20 to 25 knots with 7 to 8-foot seas, west 25 for the Barren Islands and about 20 knots for Kamishak Bay. And small craft advisories, a good southwest wind at 30 knots for Southern Cook Inlet and seas up to 10 feet north of the Foreland, south 20. And for Tuesday, light easterlies, Northern Cook Inlet in the forecast for Tuesday, south 15 here for Southern Inlet and west 25. Small craft advisories extend from Kamishak Bay across the Barren Islands and then turn southerly and southwest here along the North Gulf Coast, the same speed, 25 knots. Prince William Sound will edge it up to 15 out of the southeast. And for Kodiak Island, southwest winds 25 to 30 knots, strongest in Shelikof Strait, seas running 8 to 10 feet. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, light westerlies at 15, kind of a break there in the wind. 5-foot seas, small craft advisories for the Alaska Peninsula, 25 to 30 knots out of the southwest, 8 to 10-foot seas, and small craft advisories right on up in and across Bristol Bay. Those turn westerly, but hold at 25 knots there for the bay on Tuesday, 7-foot seas, lightening up to 20 knots here farther down the peninsula. South side, northwest 15, or I'm sorry, northwest 25, turn west at 25 from Castle Cape on up to Sitkinak, and southwest 30 knots there along the east side of Kodiak Island with westerlies at 25 for Shelikof Strait. Fox Islands tomorrow for Unalaska Island, southwest 30 knots. Unamak Island, south 30 knots with seas running 8 to 11 feet. Small craft advisories, Adak and Atka, southwest 25 to 30 with 7 to 12 foot seas. Much lighter out here to the west, down to 10 knots there for the areas from Kiska to Attu. And then for Tuesday, light winds coming into the picture here with basically high pressure. North to northwest at 10 knots, all the way over to Atka. Seas coming down to 3 to holding maybe 7 feet, and that's about it. And for the eastern Aleutians, specifically Unalaska Island, northwest 15 to 20 with 5 to 8 foot seas. Southwest coast, 25 knot small craft advisory wind south of Nunivak Island, 20 knots for the Pribilofs, west-southwest 15 knots, St. Matthew Island on up to Norton Sound where they drop to 10 knots. And for Tuesday, St. Lawrence Island north at 15, northwest 20 along the coast, and northwest 15 from St. Matthew Island to St. George. Up along the Beaufort Sea east side here, west 10 to 15, northwest 10 on the central coast, north 10 on the west side, Cape Beaufort to Wales, north at 15. And for Tuesday, northwest 20 from Wales on up to Cape Thompson, and then Cape Thompson, Cape Beaufort, northwest 15, then edge it back down to 10 knots out of the north for the central and western coast, and light, real light breezes, gentle breezes at 5 to 10 knots there for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And for tonight, again, surges of rain, some of which are heavy, will be continuing to push eastward across the interior. One with this trough, warm front rains coming in with this system, kind of a weak warm front though, and then rain onto the southwest coast with drizzle, fog, IFR conditions along the Aleutians. Nice over the Panhandle, mostly sunny day, lower 70s. Southern Panhandle tomorrow, wet in the interior. Next system brings more rain in to the, across Monday night and into Tuesday over the eastern interior. And again, the increasing winds for northern Lynn Canal.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.